even my parents knows that. I mean, I'm a carbon analyst for 15 years, and now they understand my job after China announced the pledge.
If you don't like ads and want to support the show, click the Patreon link in the show notes and subscribe for an ad-free feed.
Power outages, coal power investment restrictions, and carbon trading, plus China? Yenshin is a carbon analyst at Refinitiv based in Norway, here to explain all that and more. Co-hosting is my Rhodium colleague, Irina Leo. Welcome to China Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with what's in the news this week, power outages. How did we get here? Maybe it's best to start with, a brief history of China's energy mix and how it's changed over time.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good time for having this podcast when really a lot of focus on China energy policy and following the power shortages in some provinces. And I would stress it's regionally. It's not like, I mean, I've seen the title saying China back to Stone Age. I said, okay, hey, my parents video, I mean, that's so exaggerating. Okay, I myself said there are over 20 provinces are curbing power partly to some industries in some cities for a few hours, right? But of course, this is, officially we call it the worst episode of power shortages, or to the extent it's so widespread. So this is the worst in a decade. So that is precise. Because previously, yes, I mean, I can be back to 20 years ago, since I'm old enough to remember that. In 2002 and also in 2010, there were a few occasions where there have been power shortages in some provinces, and as late as in December or as near as in December 2020, where we have cold snap and we have power shortages in the central, in Hunan and Jiangxi, etc. So yeah, it is true it's happening more frequent, but overall, I mean, if we look at a bird eye view of China's energy mix, China is a country rich in coal supply, and coal is supplying more than 60% of the China's power supply, and we say 50, so it's more than half of the country's energy consumption. So that shows how the energy mix is, and this picture has changed a bit in the past 20 years. I mean, we all heard of how renewables is building so fast, etc. But currently, coal is still dominating in China's energy mix. And that's why it always puts China in the spotlight in terms of climate policy.
So why does China go through so many episodes of power outages? It seems like it happens quite often in the winter.
Yeah. So I think that, history does repeat a little bit when in 22 and 2010, that is when China had rapid economic expansion. So industry grows rapidly, and of course, then you need a lot of energy, where, industry still consuming more than half of China's energy consumption. So with such a energy-intensive, economic structure, the demand for energy is enormous. So that's why there have been outages that were short energy supply previously. But I think there are specific reasons for what's happening now and what happened in December 2020. This is also showing where the country is transitioning to a more renewable-based energy mix. So, green transition is the theme all over the world, which is definitely considering what we have to do to save the globe, to save the earth. So, yes, that's what's necessary. But on the other hand, when we have very stretched on the supply side, we are phasing out fossil fuel. But this year we have a strong rebound post-COVID. Again, it's happening not only in China, but globally. So supply cannot meet short-term surge in demand. And then we have the crunch.
Yeah, it seems like the whole world is going through an energy crisis right now. Do you feel like there are any similarities between like the petrol shortages in Europe with what's happening in China?
I myself, as I said, I'm based in Norway, also analyzing China climate policy. Right now there are similarities. In Europe, UK specifically, that petrol shortage, and that's bit logistics challenges we have seen. But in Europe, energy prices are increasing. In Norway, our power price, even though in Norway it's almost 100% hydroelectricity, power prices has increased this year considerably compared to last year, and the same for all European countries. Every day is almost a new record. So all of our utility bills will be more expensive this winter than previously. So part of it is global. Globally, gas prices are increasing, coal prices are increasing. So there are some factors definitely common around the globe. So it's like when everyone is buying at the same time.
I'm curious, Yen, because this seems like a very dramatic thing to happen that, futures markets should have like priced in or something. Like, were there like big exogenous shocks that led to what's happening right now, or just like a lot of like different sort of streams of things happening building up to something like this? And, if it's the latter or the former, sort of what does that say about the health of the global, I don't know, energy chain?
I'm an energy market analyst, so this really goes to my heart because I work with traders a lot. There are many parts, and but we call it a perfect storm. To be started with, me as a market analyst, I haven't exactly predict this sharp rise or tripling in prices. I mean, I would have started a hedge fund if I correct with that, or I would hedge my house's electricity bill last year at a fixed price, which is 1/3 now. But with the sharp rise is surprised most people in the market. I think what's really is a lot of us has underestimated when you have a mixture of many factors at the same time. So of course, I mean, as I said just now, when the whole world is recovering from COVID restrictions, industry are recovering, of course, demand for energy is rising. And secondly, this year was a bit special. We have, in terms of weather impact, when Europe is moving to a more renewable-based power system, so we are more depending on wind turbines and solar panels. But in terms of weather conditions, this year there are less. There are days with very low wind, and also in Norway, in Spain, in the Alps, there have been less rain, less snow and rain. So it's like everything tilted the same direction. Well, of course, in Norway, we're happy when it's sunny and nice weather, but now we see that it's what leads to more expensive energy prices.
Okay, so what's the worst day for a renewable energy? It's like cloudy with no wind and no rain?
Yes. And also, I think what also happens is we call it when you have, in the summer, when you have heat wave, that's where it's always in the still day. So heat wave, that's when your energy demand, your power demand is high, but at the same time still. And the same can happen in the winter. And that's part of the reason we have the winter power shortages in central China in last December. It's in the cold snap, and there's less wind as well. And this also similar is actually what happening in northeast China in last weekend as well.
How do these power outages generally relate to China's climate energy situation? Are we going to be seeing a lot more power outages as China tries to transition to carbon neutrality?
How to ensure reliability and decarbonization goes hand in hand. But basically, I think ensuring enough energy supply is still the top priority. For the energy system going green, that is inevitable. Well, I think now it's really a short-term pain. I think I was often asked, or in the past weeks was asked many times, does this round of China's power shortage, does it relate to its climate policy? Then I say, partly, because in the past, so why China has a power shortage, which in essence is actually a coal shortage, because power plants cannot get sufficient coal supply. So they can only run, what's reported in northern China, probably they're running half of the capacity, and they have to save coal for the upcoming winter season. And so why I said China as a coal-producing country has a coal shortage? It is really in the past. For one, it's really the rapid and more sharp rise in coal demand this year. also that is above the increase in coal production and even plus imports. Well, then why China's coal production has slowed down? That is partly because climate and environmental policies in the past years, where China has closed down a lot of aging coal mines. Of course, they are unsafe to operate, and putting more strict safety and environmental rules. As well, on the coal mines, they're producing less. In the past years, the theme is doing green transition and have climate and environmental policy dominated.
And so let's take a step back. Can you do a sort of brief overview of Xi and climate policy? Like why is he focused on this, and maybe how would you grade his commitment to reducing China's carbon footprint over the past few years?
I mean, we hear a lot about China's climate pledge, but what's really significant is that China accounts for 30% of global carbon emissions, and it's the biggest emitter. Also, its per capita emissions also rising. And so, yes, it means China needs to take more responsibility in tackling climate change. In last September was really significant. On 22nd September in 2020, Chinese president pledged that China will strive to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. So this is like 10 years behind what the European Union has pledged, but I mean, given the size of China, etc., I mean, that's the first time. Last September was the first time China announced a year of carbon neutrality. So that is huge. And in addition, Chinese president also announced China will aim to peak carbon emissions before 2030. I mean, that really signals China is willing to contribute more to the Paris Agreement, to global climate efforts. I mean, it's estimated that with China's carbon neutrality pledge, we could already contribute to reduce global warming by around 0.2 to 0.3 degrees, simply because the size of China or the large share of its emissions. So it's very significant. And since last September, in the past years, we have seen China gradually making more pledges, building upon the carbon neutrality goal. So as say, China has set new 2030 climate targets. China will tripling its wind and solar installed capacity by 2030. So basically installing at least 100 gigawatts of combined wind and solar capacity per year. Now, I mean, as recent, we've also heard at latest United Nations General Assembly, where China announced it will stop building new coal-fired plants abroad. So, I mean, this is injecting a lot of good momentum ahead of the climate summit, ahead of COP26 in Glasgow in a month's time or end of this month. So that's a brief summary of China's climate pledge and why it matters.
Why is this even happening in the first place? Is Beijing just doing this out of the goodness of their heart? Like, what is the kind of internal political economy within China which are driving these commitments?
No, I think that September, that commitment really surprised most of climate watchers and really welcomed the message. I think they are, the outcome will be beneficial, let's say, for global climate efforts. But I think there are indeed a lot of, as you said, internal political and economic incentives as well. And to start with, I think Chinese leadership is more aware of the impacts of climate change on China. I mean, we were saying that with global warming, with probably 2-degree warming, many coastal cities in China, they will be under sea levels, including Shanghai. That's why I studied.
But Yan, I thought we're supposed to develop the West.
That's
okay, fair.
Yeah, and second, exactly as you mentioned, develop the West. So which means China, as we mentioned in the beginning, in the past, I mean, since the 1978 opening and reform of Chinese economy, then China's economy has been heavily relying on industry, or especially the more energy-intensive. And when in the world, almost everything is made in China, But now China has to transform its economic structure as well, really to change from more industry-based or industry-stimulated economic growth to more like service or high-tech industry-based as in the West. So I think industrial transformation is also part of the reason. It's more densely populated on the east coast, as we call them as load center, or most energy will be consumed on the east. But then now it's also a process of moving more industry to the west. And why? Because of China's renewable resources are more abundant in the west. So here's why we need to move to the west as well.
So I guess my question is, how much of it do you think we can actually see from these pledges? Do you think they'll actually follow through with it? Or is there just a lot of virtue signaling?
No, I think we have to see what China really pledged. It's always very short sentence at any big UN conference or in China's People's Congress, etc. But all these short sentences, they will be followed. They will be guidelines for the upcoming policies. So that's why these pledges are very short, but I believe they will be followed because what's important is they dominate the upcoming policies. So as an example is last September after China announced carbon neutrality pledge, carbon neutral really become a huge buzzword. I mean, that's because the fever, it's really spreading much faster than I've seen Europe, even Europe in 2019, or since 2019 has been discussing net zero targets, etc. We have a Green Deal, etc. But carbon neutral has become such a hot topic in such a short time, and it is influencing policies, etc. So I think this will change.
Between China's real estate worries, rising inflation, and the pandemic disrupting global markets, finding promising investments is harder than ever. But billionaires and institutional investors won't be caught off guard. In fact, they've been prepared for years. The smartest investors protect their portfolios with uncorrelated assets like contemporary art. And for the first time ever, you don't need large amounts of capital to invest in art. Masterworks is the only platform that lets you invest in the very same multi-million-dollar masterpieces as billionaire collectors. The world's most famous artists like Kusama and Banksy, all available on the Masterworks platform. They've just received a valuation of over $1 billion, making them the first and only unicorn in the alternative investing world. The wait list to join Masterworks and their over 200,000 members is extensive, but I've partnered with them to get a few VIP passes for you all to skip to the front. Just head to masterworks.io/ChinaTalk to secure your spot. See important disclosures at masterworks.io/disclaimer.
Continuing on Irina's question, what aspect of sort of foreign policy flows into this? There's some people have been making arguments that, you know, doing these announcements on the world stage and sort of responding to a lot of the criticism that, foreign analysts have had, particularly when it comes to funding coal-fired power plants abroad, is partially sort of a push to improve China's image and demonstrate its like commitment as a global player. To what extent do you think those sorts of incentives are driving these policies as much as, you know, what you were saying about people being scared Shanghai's going to be underwater? And
I think that's or like reputation internationally is part of it. But I think I want to, or in my view, I do not think Chinese policymakers get too much what about Western medias are discussing. So that's really, but I think in terms of reputation, I mean that in global climate negotiations, China is representing developing countries. So I think, right, China, so in every climate summit, and China is stressing we need to have common but differentiated responsibilities because developed countries, they have been much for early in industrialization, and they are more responsible for the cumulative emissions. And developing countries, they are still in industrialization, so that's why their emissions are likely to increase. So I think for me, in terms of international reputation, it does play a role. But for me, I think it's mainly from the perspective of representing developing countries and to have a stronger voice in international climate negotiations.
Gotcha. One last question before we get into carbon trading. Yen, there's a debate about whether or not sort of U.S.-China climate cooperation would mean anything for the future of the world's temperature. Are countries, we talked in the beginning of this conversation about how sort of interrelated and interconnected global energy markets are to shocks. But I'm curious to what extent you also see that when it comes to people doing reform on their own energy grids and energy systems. How could more global cooperation help, and where does it not really matter?
I think more global cooperation helps, but on the other hand, I think it's both. So let's say in the EU, it emphasizes a lot on climate leadership, or to have, there's even an idea of climate club. So which means that the bigger emitters, if they join hands and to have more common opinions or common agreement on, let's say, climate actions, etc., that will help to speed up, again, the global climate efforts. So that is helpful because when bigger countries are dragging forward. But on the other hand, given what we have seen the past 5-6 years, collaboration is very difficult. There are also the world is, I feel right now in the past, especially after COVID crisis, the world is, there are more and more barriers in the world. So it's very hard to think of collaboration or real collaboration. But on the other hand, for climate policy, for decarbonization, even competition is good. And let's say we have EU, China, and US competing about renewable technology, competing about EV technology, energy storage. These are what's needed for decarbonization. So in that, collaboration can drive innovation, and competition can also drive innovation.
All right, switching gears a little bit. The other big news that happened this year is that China launched its emissions trading scheme, right? Could you give maybe a brief history of the ETS in China and why China would want to implement an ETS?
I can start with, carbon market, China's national carbon market really launched this year after 10 years, exactly 10 years in the making. But for you who are not familiar with carbon trading or ETS, I can say that, ETS is what we call a compliance carbon market. That is in contrast to voluntary or offset carbon market. So in the ETS, government will hand out quotas or allowances, digital, not in paper, but there will be a bank. It's called registry. There'll be carbon registry. So the allowances you get will be saved in your account in the registry. And by the end of each year, you have to submit your emissions, your carbon emissions for this year, and you have to hand in the same amount of allowances, equal to your emissions. If you have, government will hand less and less allowances, basically why? To incentivize companies to reduce emissions. And so if you have less allowances, you have to either, let's say, increase your efficiency or produce more cleaner, or you have to buy allowances from others who have surplus. So this is why carbon trading. So in the ETS was treated as allowances. So in the world that the European carbon market, the EU ETS, has been in place since 2005, and it accounts for over 80% of global carbon trading volumes in the form of, let's say, spot, futures, options, etc., all form of financial products. And China's national ETS starting this year, but it has begun the process in 2010. Well, why? I think that because China needs an effective carbon price signal. So in a market where buyer and seller, they trade their allowances, so that can help to form a very effective price signal. That's a free market. It is, and which can really be a cost-effective way of reducing emissions. So China has been borrowing a lot of experiences from the EU, and also that was including the UK as well in the past years. There's a lot of knowledge transfer and capacity building. So in this year, China started its national ETS, and trading started officially on 16th of July. In terms of covered emissions, I mean, as I said, China is the biggest emitter in the world. So in terms of China's carbon market, only covers the power sector. So basically all of the coal and gas power plants in China, and their emissions are around 4.5 gigaton. So that is almost 3 times more than what the European carbon market covers now, or twice of the European carbon market when it was started. So in terms of covered emissions, China's national carbon market is huge.
What are some major differences, maybe, or similarities between the EU ETS and China's ETS, considering that China's carbon market is going to be much larger?
Yeah. There has been a lot of, so China ETS really has borrowed a lot of experience from the EU ETS. So the structure and etc. are very similar in terms of how to set, we call a benchmark, and how to basically set the rules on how to hand out allowances. A lot of it's very similar. A key difference, though, is that the target, the one I mean that in the ETS, government will hand out less allowances, and in China that the target currently is again an intensity-based target. So meaning that it's only measured based on per kilowatt hour your CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour of power output. So that means there is no absolute amount of emissions in China's ETS on the top. That's in contrast to the EU ETS. In the EU ETS, how much allowances will be handed out each year is already been decided, already 10-year ahead, and it's in line with the climate target. And China currently set it's called intensity or rate-based target. But I think we'll, of course, as China has pledged to peak carbon emissions before 2030, so China will eventually set an upper limit on the CO2 emissions. And that will really define how many allowances will be covered in the carbon market, because China's carbon market is supposed to cover power sector now, around 40% of China's emissions, but it's also aimed to expand to all the industry sectors by 2025. So by then, it will cover more than 70% of China's emissions. So let's say the role of carbon trading in China will also has a potential in the next years.
So do you think that China's ETS will actually be effective in reducing carbon emissions?
Well, let's see what you compare to. I mean, still, when we think of China, that's every mechanism designed in China will be with Chinese characteristics. So yes, and on the other hand, exactly because China has set the target to peak emissions before 2030, so there is a lot of regulatory measures, or we say command and control, already in place. And the industry sectors I talked about, the steel sector enterprises, etc., they already pledged to peak emissions by 2025. So there are already other measures simultaneously being implemented alongside the ETS. So I think that's minimizing the role of what the ETS can play in contrast to what really is happening in Europe, where we have carbon price of 64 euro per ton today, and in China was around 42 yuan, so 6 euro. And as of, I mean, not holidays closed, but as of its last on 30th September. So the price level was super quite different. I think a low price level, of course, it will have also minimal impacts on reducing emissions. Yeah, I mean, in that sense, I would say regulated measures could have bigger impacts in reducing emissions compared to the ETS. The objective of the ETS, there are two. One is really to establish a very good carbon or emissions accounting system of the country. I mean, this has been the point where China hasn't been able to establish yet. And let's say, I mean, the last official emissions for China was in 2014. So yeah, let's see, it's quite lagging behind in terms of GHG, we call it, or the greenhouse gas emissions accounting system, as you have in Europe, in America, etc. Yeah, but the second is also to use the ETS to start to have a price signal, even though it's low, €6. But this price signal could provide as a reference for other policies. And I think that carbon, for some sectors, ETS is more suitable, but for, let's say, transport sector, etc., maybe a carbon tax is more suitable. But the price from the ETS could as a reference when you're setting the tax rate, etc., in the future. So there will be multiple policies. There will always be both regulated and market-based.
We've seen this dramatic increase in sort of popular attention, at least in the US and Europe, towards energy policy. I'm curious, to what extent is momentum for climate change and reform a popular issue?
So I think first of all, when I grew up, I think environmental policy or environmental impacts was much more important. However, in the past, I think it's really when China joined Paris Agreement and made the 2030 climate goals, and that started to make, like I would say, even my parents make ordinary people more aware of climate policies. Because Paris Agreement, etc. And again, I think we have more and more extreme weather events in past years. This July is exactly my hometown in Xinjiang, where we had it's besides Zhengzhou, and where we had the flood one day after each other, the severe flood. So that's very extreme. But already in 2016, that's in the summer holiday, when I was in Xinjiang, we actually had the same flood in that morning. So extreme weather events is becoming more frequent. So I think that is really driving people's awareness, right? We're seeing more reporting of, this is linked to climate change and etc. We have more heat waves in the summer, more cold snaps in the winter, and more droughts or the severe floods. So I think that's driving really more people more aware of it. But of course, officially what really changed last September until now, I think it's really broad educating of what carbon neutrality is, and is really changing. So I say even my parents knows that. I'm a carbon analyst for 15 years, and now they understand my job after China announced the pledge. So I would say that's a big change. So now it's very easy to explain to them what I do as carbon analyst.
So what do you say? You say, I make sure that China's doing what it says it does?
Yeah, I said, no, I make sure some people can earn money.
Back to carbon markets, what do you predict for the price of carbon in China? Like, should we be investing in certain carbon offsetting companies or something?
No. Now it's not allowed to, or you can, or what you do, you can register a power plant or a coal plant in China. No, I think for the national carbon market, the threshold is quite high. You have to be, certain, you have to be emitting certain ton of CO2 per year and energy consumption. So it's mainly targeting at the bigger emitters. But what's we have a price forecast as well as my profession. So I think it's with my evaluation of abatement costs or etc. It's very technical. But I think that something between it will be gradually rising. So with carbon market price, we always gradually rising. Because why? Because government has to reduce the allowances they handed out. And second, carbon price has to increase for carbon price to have can incentivize emission reduction. So that's two. But in addition, I think what's really interesting is, in addition to the national carbon market, there are 8 regional pilots or provincial or city pilots, which has been existing since 2013. And there are more and more smaller pilots as well, where, they are, this is all more the general carbon offsetting idea. If you plant a tree, like in Guangdong, they have the initiative of, if you send in your secondhand clothes, they have a methodology on how to convert that to, so like everything you reduce your carbon footprint, then they can count as, you can get certain points or even rewards etc. So this kind of campaign is picking up as well.
What is your future takes on the carbon capture, utilization, and storage industry? Do you see a lot of investment going into that industry from China?
I think this is a global effort. In China, I mean, there are very good literature on that. Even the government published the CCUS white paper or progress report with a very good map of or detailed information of the pilot projects. But from the experts, I think that the technology is not mature at the moment. It's more in a pilot stage. And in terms of abatement costs, it's still around at least $80 or $140 per ton. And so quite costly. I mean, let's say, and also even when I speak to power enterprises, utilities in China, they are less enthusiastic about this because they could have just invested in renewables, right? So the best emission is the one you don't emit. So I think this is not what could happen in a large scale in the next 10 years. But if we look very long ahead in the 2050 perspective, so China's power sector has to go net zero or fully decarbonized by 2050. So there will be some coal plants or gas plants still running after 2050 when the power system is mainly supported by renewables. But then the last bit of fossil generation will need to be equipped with CCUS. So I think it's just the time isn't ripe for that now. So right now we can follow the pilot schemes, and there are some of them are quite successful as well. But on a wider scale, I think we have to, at least for the next 10 years.
In general, are you optimistic, hopeful for our climate change situation?
Me, I think we are. I think after China committed to it, I'm more optimistic. And it's not because I am Chinese but I think that when the Chinese leadership and Chinese citizens start to be aware of climate change risks, and so I think that will drive a change. So I'm quite optimistic on the Glasgow on COP26. Yeah, and I was actually very nervous on this year, 22nd of September in the evening, because really not sure if China will announce new enhanced pledge. I mean, it's 1 year marking, but then China really announced we will stop building coal plants abroad. So I think that, so for one, of course, we can say China still has a lot of homework to do regarding coal plants inside China. But I think that Chinese leadership is building upon its pledges. It's a very positive signal. So this makes me quite optimistic on the upcoming climate summit.
Yan, thanks so much for being a part of China Talk.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We're running to the Canton, y'all. 我穿上牛仔裤，再套上一件 T， 新的超网时间就像洛杉矶。我哥们打我电话问我哪里去，约他见个面，他住在我隔壁。先水你帽子来跟我的手表配色，再坐上我哥们上个月刚买的车。我打开音量让他听未发布的歌，我保持新鲜，你就像没气的可乐。We're running。一点的广州塔，你可能见过，在路上改装的宝马。我打开微信，就有女孩来问我在哪，我没有备注，忘记是 Coco 还是 Lina。我在新生路，她在对我放电，有2个人住，我想跟我拍照片，她一直靠近我，把我当成靠垫，都在找插头，找不到的在抱怨。Shawty wanna fuck with me, we're running to the GTC， 很多黑人的三元里，我住在广州，想住在洛杉矶。Back girl wanna fuck with me, we're running to the GTC， 年轻些优秀在这里，我住在广州，想住在迈阿密。我现在草稿也刚跳牢牢，这城市太过烧脑，允许他逃跑。你要照顾一家老小，把工作找好。我情况不算糟糕，还没被铐到。再看看那些钞票，每天被烧掉。你每天都在操劳，但却不高效。从海珠开到天河，实现到先得。我不用看水脸色，不跟你牵扯。看那些高楼大厦，要的你无法投机。我跟我哥们达成共识，要出人头地。他答应他的妈妈，在这里必须争气，把刀子放亮，先学做人，再学做生意。我可以每一天都过生日。有时候一个人在工作室，在这里被出卖了多少次，给你个 bitch 买个爱马仕。Shawty wanna fuck with me,
Magic on the beat.